Hi. Sorry it took me a second to join. I have a bunch of Warhammer minis on my table that I had to clear out. Hello, hello.
Cool.
Microphone. Hello. Try again. uh, Welcome to another IATSE gaming stream. Today is a beautiful day to talk about anti-union campaigns and how we can combat them. So today on stream, I feel like every week I hop on here and I don't say who the hell I am because I just assume that you all understand the lore and have done your research on that. So I'm going to introduce myself because I never do that. But my name's Chrissy. I am an organizer and international representative with the IATSE. I'm specifically focused on helping folks in games organize. So that's my job, that's my charge. I previously worked in 2D animation for 17 years before making the switch to being a full-time organizer, and I helped organize my workplace in 2022, which was a place called Titmouse. And now I do this all the time, and it is the greatest privilege and the most wonderful thing that I could be doing with my life. So I'm very excited to be doing it, and proud, and as I said, privileged. I would love to introduce you to my two co-hosts today. We have Dan Beglov and we have Marissa Bernstol on with us today. Dan, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself to the folks?
Sure. I'm Dan. Like Chrissy said, I'm a narrative designer and artist. I work my day job as an XR firm, and my night job is at an indie studio called Team Gramps. I have been volunteering with IATSE for about a year now, actually, and I'm specifically joined to help marginalized creatives and juniors understand their rights and hopefully do my part to protect everyone against being exploited by management.
Awesome. Glad to have you here, Dan, as always. We have Marissa here as well. Marissa, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Marissa. I've been on a couple times, but just in case, I'm currently a storyboard artist and also one of the elected leaders at the Animation Guild. But before that, and the whole thing that got me involved in my union more actively is because I came from games. I worked as a cinematic artist and an animation animator at Telltale and 2K and a couple other places. So now that I'm protected by a contract, I want to do everything I can to make sure that people in games get protected too, because I'm essentially doing the same work, just with better protections, and there's really no reason why games shouldn't also have that protection. So,
I
yeah.
agree 10,000%. Again, as always, glad to have you both here. And we have a big announcement this week, which is that our panel from GDC, with which Dan here was also a part, is now available on the GDC Vault for free. You don't gotta log in. You just gotta go to the site and you can watch it. It was great. If you scan the QR code in the lower left-hand side of the screen or go to linkup.top/gameworkers, you'll find a link directly to that panel. So you can check it out, give it a watch. Watch me be a new nervous goober for an hour. And also listen to the amazing, incredible things that folks like Dan, Andrew, Lauren, and Vimy, who are our panelists, have to say about forming unions in games. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. And if you have, watch it again. It's always a great rewatch. But anyway, this week we're here to talk about anti-union campaigns and ultimately how we can combat them and what we do in our organizing in order to combat them. So first off, Marissa or Dan, I'd love to ask you, have you at work ever heard any anti-union rhetoric from your bosses or from other folks on your team?
Mm. I personally have not at my day job, but I know a lot of people around me in the industry have. Like, I know it's a pretty routine thing that happens, especially in larger like AAA studios. Personally, I haven't, but I'm like well aware of like the anti-union propaganda that usually management spins to workers.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing anything directly coming from management about it. Mostly because I feel like I was at some pretty fear-based places where it actually never came up. If I heard anything, it was usually from uninformed coworkers. But yeah, there was a lot of misinformation about unions, and it never got to a point where management even had to say anything negative about it. But again, I hear plenty with like just looking around and hearing from other people that it absolutely happens all the time.
Yeah. Like what kind of misinformation would you hear, do you think?
Some of the misinformation I'd hear would be, well, number one is that a union's like a third party that has its own management that you have to deal with, rather than the union being you. So they're like, why would we bring in this third party? It's just going to make things more complicated than they already are. Um, Along with another big one that I hear a lot is like unions are just trying to prey on you, like for money, which
Mhm.
is absolutely not the case. But that seems to be a big one that I hear a lot is like, oh, they're just, why would you trust them? You should trust us. We're actually trying to protect you from getting preyed on by some third party.
Yeah.
Yeah. One that I hear a lot also is that kind of I don't know if you would count it as like deliberate misinformation or just something that people say without being necessarily acquainted with the topic, but how unions are only good for last resort radical measures, and that kind of being like, oh yeah, this is good if you want to strike or something, but you don't want to strike, do you? Like, it's not that bad here, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Collective action almost always gets like slimmed down to just striking. When there are it's a rainbow. There's so many different ways that you can act collectively that don't include striking to motivate your boss to do the things that you need them to do. Um, but yeah, those are all very common things that I also hear from folks. And all that stuff is only further supported by your employer. Um, I like to call it corporate sponsored messaging. They love you to believe that. Um, but yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what it is exactly that we fear, so that we can help folks overcome it. So, a question I'd love to ask you is, in a hypothetical studio situation, Marissa, maybe think back to your times working in games, and Dan, maybe think of a place where you might have wanted to unionize in the past.
Mhm.
Excuse me. But how do you think that your boss would have reacted in the instance that y'all unionized at your studio? Diving deep.
Yeah. Really, like I think it depends on the person, but I don't think necessarily negatively. I think there's a big expectation of bosses like reacting severely negatively, and of course, like I think that does happen, especially since there's a lot of like anti labor sentiment in like upper management at a lot of studios. But I've known of people who have been like supportive of people's rights to unionize. So voluntary recognition is always an option for people. That's it doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship. It can just be um, you recognize the union and that's about it. You work together to solve the issues that workers pose to you. Yeah. And I think that's also like a pretty realistic thing to at least hope for from people. Like if they're a reasonable person, they'll understand like your reasonable like asks, you know.
It's about collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
We're not here to be antagonistic. What about you, Marissa? Do you think that like your old bosses would have voluntarily recognized you?
Unfortunately, no. I don't think that would have gone over so well, just based on the fact that even a simple uh, complaint would wind up trying to either be swept under the rug or like in some instances that personally for me like I would be told like, oh, that we can't raise this issue. This is gonna look bad on you if you do this. So definitely, just based on a couple of small incidences, I can't imagine um, that would go over too well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I can completely understand that. Do you have any idea of what, like, was there an idea in your head about what they might have done in that instance, other than just knowing they would act negatively?
well, at the time, no, I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have assumed some of the worst, like they'll fire us. You know, they'll just lay the whole department off. Knowing what I know now, I know that cannot happen. It's illegal.
Yeah.
But I certainly didn't know that at the time, and I'm sure none of my coworkers did either. But I think I would go straight to they'll fire us. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's a very common thing, especially in games right now, that people cite is they'll just let us go. They'll just lay us
Mm-hmm.
off because we're in this period where there's so many layoffs at work. Um, but under the National Labor Relations Act, you're protected as a laborer to form a union, and once you form a union, they're not allowed to terminate you based on your union activity. They're not allowed to threaten you with studio closure. They're not allowed to threaten you with shipping your job overseas. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're not allowed to threaten you with a demotion or a reduction in your pay in response to you forming a union. There was actually a worker at Nintendo who got, I guess, caught. I don't want to say caught. Their boss found out that they were talking about unions with their coworkers and laid them off. And ultimately, they filed an unfair labor practice with the National Labor Relations Board, and they won their court case, which included back pay. There's many ways that you can win a court case, so that's just one way. You could also have your position reinstated, like some of the Starbucks workers. There was one woman who was a major force in forming the original Starbucks union, and she was laid off, but she recently had back pay and was reinstated at her Starbucks location. So there's many different outcomes that could happen there. But you are protected under the National Labor Relations Act. And Daenerys Isaac is bringing up Weingarten rights in the chat. And Weingarten rights is a great topic. I think that's something that maybe for a future discussion we should focus on. But Weingarten rights are basically your ability to have your union representative present with you in any disciplinary meeting. So if your boss calls you in and says they want to talk to you about some union stuff, or they want to talk to you about your job performance, you can say that you want your union representative there with you, and they will be there to back you up and make sure that they're following the book, of which that book I don't believe is written, but it is the law. I don't have a title. But yeah, so there again, like I feel like a common thing that people think is that your boss will react negatively, and it's entirely a possibility. You know, I'm not here to tell you that they're going to be all peaches and cream about it. But we're not asking for an adversarial relationship here. We're asking for a collaborative one. So the only person who's getting real upset about it in a negative way is them. Um,
Mhm.
I get asked a lot by folks who like are starting their own business or um, think that they have a manager, or rather they have executives at their company who they feel are pro union, like what could a boss do? And the best thing that a boss can do is voluntarily recognize once you form your union and be very outspoken about how pro union they are, so that their workers feel comfortable forming one and know that there will be no pushback once they form it. Um, so here's another great question I'd love to ask y'all. From either, mostly from people in your community, are there any like negative things that people tell you about unions? Or any
People get
myths you've
worried.
heard yourself?
Yeah, people get worried about dues. That's the thing that I see a lot. I think people are very wary of being exploited, like monetarily, and giving money from their paycheck to an organization seems like a big step to take, and something that like naturally I think gives like cynicism. Like like yeah, I think like it's natural to feel like very hesitant and like cynical way about it. It's like, oh, what are they gonna do but take my money? You know, I think that's the main thing I see from outsiders and people who are like on the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, Stussy brings up the southern states that are passing anti-union laws. I don't think they're doing away with voluntary recognition, but they're saying that businesses, I think this is a Florida thing. Forgive me if I'm wrong, Stussy. But they're removing the ability for companies to get government assistance or government grants if they voluntarily recognize a union. Um, is Georgia doing away fully with voluntary recognition, or is that kind of like the deal there too? But in response to dues, Dan, yeah, a lot of people have complaints about dues, but it does cost money to run a union. Um,
Yeah.
and we have lawyers, we need to pay them. Um, and in order to make sure that grievance procedures are upheld and that the contract itself is upheld, it requires money. Um, but the thing about dues is that we make them affordable. If they were putting unjust pressure on workers, then the workers wouldn't be able to support the union itself. So, um, the for as an example from the Animation Guild. So I'm an Animation Guild member out of New York, and Marissa can speak to being an Animation Guild member in Los Angeles. But in New York, our dues are $90 per quarter because we are paid less than Los Angeles, and we are also in a higher cost of living area. Um,
Mm.
and in Los Angeles, they are
140, I
140
believe.
a quarter,
They're
um,
145. Yeah.
which is a little over $30 a month. 40 bucks a month.
Yeah.
I'm so
It's
bad at math.
one of the lower dues in the area. But yeah.
Yeah, but ultimately, like the way that it gets put into place is that it's something that gets negotiated in your contract. So when you form your first contract, you will ultimately determine what your dues will be. So
Mhm.
we'll look at like the general cost of living for the area. We'll look at the general pay rate for folks in the contract and ultimately determine a fair number based out of that. Give it to the unit, and the unit will say, yes, I'm okay with that number, or no, I'm not, and we'll negotiate. Um, so it's ultimately agreed upon. Um, but with that, you get health care, retirement, all the protections that a union contract can bring, which includes the if you win it anyway, the removal of at-will employment, which is huge. Can you imagine? Your boss can't just fire you for any reason.
Wouldn't that
Um,
be nice?
right? Um, so if a lot of people I feel who complain about dues either don't understand what it goes towards, or they don't understand that, or they don't participate fully in the forming of their contract so that they can feel they're getting a value out of it. So yeah, dues are tough, but
Yeah, I think also like just from like a personal standpoint, I think it's like a form of mutual aid, and I think like a small portion of your income going to help your like community and workers like in like next to you, I think is a perfectly reasonable ask. That's just my take on it. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dues are much cheaper than the healthcare I had to pay for being a contractor for games.
Oh
So,
man, I can't imagine.
and
Yeah.
it comes with so much more. One of the other things that comes to mind being, I know we don't need to talk about dues this whole time, but it also goes to lots of things that happen in your community as well, like certain committees formed might want to have like picnics or events and things like that are good for networking, or also like just ways to learn from each other. So it's great
Yeah.
beyond the immediate awesome protections, which is like um, you know the things Chrissy mentioned, and paying our field representatives to help with grievances, which I think is one of the biggest things you can benefit from a union as well. Actually getting, things, or holding people accountable, holding the companies accountable for things. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was gonna say like about like insurance and stuff. Like I'm a contractor right now. I don't have insurance. I can't afford it. If there was like a meta union, like or a national like organization where I could just join and opt in for like benefits by paying dues, like I would do it in a heartbeat. But right now, that's just not an option for me. So I just don't.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are in the same position as me. So I think like in that's just like a very like the discussion is so I don't know skewed. Like yeah, okay, $90 a quarter. That sounds a lot better than like what $600 a month with no like not being covered by employment for insurance. That it's just one of the rates I've seen. That's not like not dwell on it. This is a like a very serious and like we were gonna keep it chill today, but I was complaining about it to Chris.
It's still
That's
chill. We're
yeah.
still chill. We got this,
It's
Dan.
weirdly chilling.
I know. I've been a contractor before, and I know that pain of
Mm-hmm.
either shelling out for health insurance now or getting that ding on my taxes next year because I didn't have health insurance for a month.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Been there too.
Yeah. Um, so Stussy, we don't have healthcare for the Game Workers Union yet because we're continuing to form it. Um, so the more studios we get under that union blanket, the more we can invest into like the motion picture insurance, and ultimately provide a healthcare plan that goes across studio. Um, so we don't have it yet. We're working towards it every day, but that's also what we're here talking about. Um, but yeah, also, I forget, I was going to say something about dues and now I forget what it was, but it's okay. It might come back to me. Um, it's like a Netflix subscription, you know? It's like,
Oh, yeah, which brings up, I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but at the Animation Guild, if you're ever in a situation where you can't pay those dues, you can go on honorable withdrawal, which means you're still like a part of it. There's some ways you can't participate anymore, like you can't vote for certain things, but you're certainly not, you know, required to keep paying it. You have to pay back in, I think, if you want those voting rights and things back. But we're not. There are options if for some reason you're in a situation where you need to consider not paying them. You're not kicked out and ousted and like, you know, punished.
yeah, honorable withdrawal is different than What's the other one where you just stop paying your dues?
Yeah. Why am I blanking now?
Yeah.
I should know.
I forget. But Marissa, is there like a common thing that you've heard that's a negative about unions from any folks?
I think dues was the number one that came to mind, but the second one that I hear probably has to do with like again like complaints on who's running, like who's in charge, kind of like, and they're thinking of it as a third party. They're not thinking of it as themselves, and um, I think those people don't realize how much their involvement is crucial in the union. So that's the only other thing I hear is like, oh, you don't want some random people dealing with your livelihood, and it's like, oh, they're not random, they're actually more appropriate than my boss. um
And you
yeah,
elect
that's kind
them.
of exactly. I think there's some weird old thoughts of like mobsters or something running your union, which is just, I don't know,
Listen,
so far
Al
from
Capone
reality.
is dead. Al Capone's
Yeah,
been
exactly.
buried in some level of cement in a baseball stadium somewhere. Um,
Right, exactly.
but
Wow, really?
also, I mean, that's the rumor. Or
Oh,
maybe that's a different mafia guy that I'm thinking of. Oh wait, Al Capone
I
went to
like it.
jail, right? Al Capone went to Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia
Yeah,
You
he
could
died
still
from
be under.
syphilis, I'm pretty sure.
because I went there for like a ghost tour and it wasn't a ghost tour.
Oh,
It was weird. Anyway, that's another
was it
story
a
for
You
another
did.
day.
gotcha?
The
The
ghost of
ghost
Jimmy
photograph.
Hoffa is still around. Is that the guy that got buried in the cement? Thinking it's Jimmy Hoffa. But in either way, the thing about our National Union for Game Workers is that this is brand new. Um, there's we have the ability to build this from the ground up. It's brand new. It doesn't have to have any of those old pretenses. Um, we're gonna form it the way that we want to. That is to the benefit of the vast majority of us. So it doesn't have to have any of these old antiquated negative ideas that people might have about unions. We're forming it from scratch. So you
Yeah,
know,
I
we're of
really feel
course
like.
looking to other models to be like,
Mhm.
these are great ways that we can form our union, but that's not to say that we have to follow them to the T.
Yeah,
Were you going to add something to that, Marissa?
I was just gonna say it is really, for some reason, the most difficult concept I think for people just hearing about unions or having these misconceptions about unions that they act like there's no way for them to participate or have any control, which is the opposite of the truth. And I think that seems to be like a lot of people like feel resentment or something, but it's coming from such an uninformed place. Like it's the most you can participate in so many ways, by some of your leaders are probably your friends or your coworkers, so you have like a direct line and like you all have a shared common interest. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Showing up to meetings, being
Right.
communicative with your shop steward,
Mm-hmm.
um, making sure that you're participatory. A union is a very participatory activity.
Right.
Um,
And that's the part that I don't hear from those people. I think that's a missing a missing piece in their kind of vision of what it could be like.
yeah. Um, I had someone come up to me one time and say, my union does nothing for me. And I was like, I spent 17 years as a non union laborer. And I think your union does a lot for you. Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't have one, and you get all of the things, and I get none of those things.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. um, Yeah, so definitely no mafia. Dues are manageable. Jimmy Hoffa is, yes, buried in Yankee Stadium or Giant Stadium. Also, I just want to mention this. I've been seeing a lot of like gigantic freaking hot dogs on Instagram lately that are all for baseball stadiums, and I'm like, I want all of them so bad. I don't even care about baseball. Stussy says, "What's the union done for me?" is the most annoying phrase heard. My response is, "Who do you think the union is?"
Yeah.
Great. Come back with that, Stussy. I love that. Um, so let's talk about the next point, which I'd love to ask y'all if you have any thoughts on this. But like, what do our bosses ultimately already have um, at their disposal to fight a union campaign?
Fear is the main one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, authority. It just being able to have like control over like any individual person and their contract with the company is the main one. So that's a lot of the anti-union campaigns are centered around individual punishment rather than collective punishment. Because I think one person is a lot easier to control and intimidate than a group of organized people.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
fear, authority, two huge things they definitely have on their side. What do you think, Marissa?
Yeah, that's kind of what I go to as well. I suppose they have money, but like, you know, if you're a part of an organizing campaign, like, you will also have some heavy hitters to help you out too. Um, so it's not like a giant corporation versus one person. That's the whole great part about collective action.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would instantly go. I think that was a good call. The authority um, and the fear that comes with uh, disciplinary action.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I mean, we will probably get into this, like the power to promise better things as well, like
Mm-hmm.
different opportunities to give you.
Yeah. Money, power, authority, fear. Um, which the money part, historically, when um, in the past, when unions were being formed by individual groups without the backing of like a larger organization on their side, management could literally just stretch out negotiations until the workers were broke, because the workers were paying for the lawyer to be there, they were paying for all of the fees associated with it, and ultimately boss is just like, I'll just wait you out. If negotiations go long, we have the ability to file unfair labor practices if they are being if they're not negotiating in good faith. um, and our lawyers are on staff, so they're going to get paid continually. It'll be fine. um, but yeah, that power over an individual and that fear over an individual is what prevents us from coming together to organize. But if we come together, that power over an individual fades. That fear that an individual has fades, because we are in solidarity with one another. We're locking arms. We are ready to fight for our rights. Um, and yeah, other things that your boss has is like a list of everybody who works there and all your contact information and how to get in touch with you quickly, so that, if they're hearing whispers of an anti-union campaign, well, guess what? Everybody, there's an all-hands meeting tomorrow, and we're going to talk about this, and you have to be there. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of things that they have that we don't, but there's a lot of things that we have that they don't, which is our labor and our power as workers. Without us, they got nothing. Um, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
or do you have something, Dan?
I'm thinking. I think like what workers would have on bosses is solidarity. I think ultimately, uh, as a boss, you have different goals than the workers, but as a workers, you ultimately have the same goal, which is make money to survive, get paid, um, have a productive, like just have a workplace because you're relying on everyone else to get the job done. Whereas it's ultimately a different kind of relationship. So I think it's much easier to that you already have something in common with everyone at your workplace. Um, who's not a manager, which is you. You're in like fundamentally in that position, all together on the same boat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had one thought, which was, well, actually two, but it was first, we brought it up earlier. Like, some people just think of union or collective action has to go to the extreme thing, which is like strike or,
Mhm.
yeah, withholding labor. And that was the main thing. We did not talk about unionizing at Telltale, but we did talk about striking, which it's funny that we passed we passed this huge thing where we could just start talking to each other about how we could come together collectively, to collaborate. So I think there was extra fear, and it prevented us from that kind of from building that solidarity because it was such an extreme measure we were talking about, and we started thinking like, who wouldn't support us? Oh, that guy wouldn't. Like, it became way more like against each other instead of let's build to that naturally. It's not completely risk free, but it's way less risky than just, hey, let's all decide we're collectively sick,
Yeah.
and see what happens. Uh, and to that point, the reason we thought that was effective or could be effective if everybody did participate, which we knew wouldn't happen. We knew withholding our labor would get results because we were relied on so much. So that's my other point to the threats of, from your employer being fired. It's like, I'm thinking of a couple specific situations that are close to me. Like, maybe you're talking about organizing because your company is going through all these cuts and layoffs, and now you have all this crunch and like half the team. How are you able to get it done? Your boss is freaking out about how you're going to get it done. Do you think that boss is going to fire you? Like, they need you. They really need you to keep working. They can't afford to get rid of you.
Mm-mm.
I know that's not the case for every studio. I think it's the case for a lot of studios.
Mhm.
Um, so it's just something to keep in mind. Like, you're not as disposable as they want you to believe.
Yeah, they really want you to think that they could replace you tomorrow, um,
Right.
but they can't.
Yeah. A
Um,
lot harder.
Daenerys Isaac brings up working from home is dangerous as court case has dictated using a personal computer for work related material makes it a work computer, which makes it company property. I haven't heard of that before, Daenerys. Could you link that in the chat? But understandable if that's the case, but I want to encourage anybody who's listening. My cats are fighting. I want to
No.
encourage anybody who's
I,
listening to um, if you are going to communicate with your coworkers about unionism, you'll use your personal cell phone, your personal email address, your personal everything, um, so that they don't have the ability to say that. But yeah. And also, Stussy brings up the IA backing Schiff's act. Senator Schiff, is it senator or is it congressman? The guy from California.
I guess
uh, he's
representative.
he's a representative. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Daenerys. Appreciate it. Um, but Stussy is bringing up the IA backing Schiff's act about AI, which I haven't read the full act yet myself, but I know it's a good thing because he's ultimately asking for companies to state where they are getting their information from for their like algorithm learning or whatever. I am such a technological person. This is amazing. I'm great at it, which is clearly emphasized by how well I run this stream every week.
With and they have to disclose what data sets they train their large language model on. Yeah,
That was so much better said, Dan. Thank you.
in my day job is really good link to that.
That was awesome. But yeah, I think it's a positive. It's a move in the right direction. We ultimately need regulations around this stuff, in not only in government but also in our union contracts to make sure that we're protected, or that we have consent. Because I know some people really like using it for their workflows, but other people feel like it could replace them. So it ultimately depends upon exactly what you're doing for work. You know, let AI do the menial task and let people do the creative, fun stuff. You know.
This is another example of how dues can come into play, because sometimes dues are used to promote certain representatives that are going to really advocate for things that protect your craft, like Representative Schiff. I remember seeing his name come up, and we were like, yeah, this guy supports what we want, and we would want his voice to be heard because he's looking out for us.
Yeah.
Just another way that stuff kind of works out.
I was literally just talking to my partner about that. They're an educator, and they were talking about how the Massachusetts Teachers Association is fighting in the state government right now to oppose budget cuts for education. So that's like literally like one of the most important things like in a society, like
Right.
education, like fighting to like preserve that quality of education in the state. I think that's like super important.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just bananas. So I'll ask y'all one more question, and then we'll call it a wrap for today.
Wow, that was fast.
I know, these always whiz by. Because we spend like 15 minutes doing audio issue problems.
Well, maybe only one today.
Yeah, I think today went pretty smooth. I'm stoked about it. We're finally figuring this out. Someday Twitch will promote me to professional, and I'll get like a little badge or something. No, I
nice.
won't. They're not watching.
I'll make you a badge.
Oh, thanks, Marissa.
Yeah, we got this.
So my last question to y'all would be, what can your boss do, or what do they already do, that we know of that will create a culture of, like, what do they do on the daily that creates a culture of fear to dissuade us from forming a union?
Preferential treatment and isolation of workers, so like doling out rewards and punishments to individuals. Yeah, like I said before, it's like pressuring individual people because they know that collectively it's much harder to do.
Yeah.
Also anti-union campaigns, mandatory meetings, that kind of stuff, using the tools at their disposal to like propagate their point of view.
All company staff are forced to communicate through a company provided chat software that management can monitor.
Right.
The current climate of layoffs, saying y'all should be just lucky that you even have something right now. We're not lucky. We're working hard. We deserve our jobs.
Yeah.
What do you think, Marissa?
Yeah, I agree. There is another thing, not only threatening, but deliberately confusing. Bringing in that misinformation, or even like under the guise of being helpful. Like, oh, I don't know if that's like, don't you think that's gonna make this kind of not so good? Like, in a way where they're acting like they're working with you, but just sowing the seeds of confusion and doubt. I think, and also by like, yeah, separating people even more so people can't come together to kind of work that out themselves. Yeah, in some situations, I feel like people wind up being told, like, or given more work, like just purposeful crunch. Don't come to meetings. Don't do anything. Just work. Um, yeah.
Yeah, putting workers under pressure where they don't even have the time to think about it.
Yes. Yes.
You're just exhausted at the end of the day, and the last thing you want to do is talk about work. But we
Right.
got to talk about work. We got to talk about our working conditions. We got to talk to each other so that we know what everybody's going through. 'Cause separating us makes us feel alone. It makes us feel like our problems at work are individual and not systemic or communal. You know, when we organized a titmouse, I found out so much about how things were going for my coworkers that it ultimately made me feel better, because I thought that my issues were my issues, that nobody else was dealing with this sort of stuff, that clearly I wasn't good at my job and therefore I deserved to be treated like the way I was treated. But that wasn't the case. So many other people were struggling in the same way, and others were struggling in different ways. You know, it's not that everybody's going to have the same issue either, but you find out a lot about what's going on.
Yeah.
Can I relate this to a personal anecdote that is
Please.
not about work? When I was in college, I had a bad friend. And this bad friend basically ran the entire friend group. And the way they did that was by pretending they were everyone's individual best friend but bad mouthing everyone else to you,
Oh,
and then doing that to every single person in the friend group. So like they were your best friend and they would badmouth everyone else, but they were doing that to everyone else as well. And individually, no one really liked this person, but everyone thought everyone else did. So no one said anything.
mm-hmm.
And that went on for a couple of years until at one point, it took one conversation between two people to finally be like, wait, this person kind of sucks. Why are we hanging out with them? And then once the two people, like, it took one conversation just like as a sanity check. And then it was just so much easier to, like, it was like literally like my world had been made right again. I was like, so I'm not crazy. This person kind of sucks. I
Yeah.
think I think that could very easily be
Yeah.
kind of an allegory, an allegorical
Communication is
tale.
key.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to talk to one another because you find out so much.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Keeps you sane.
Yeah, sanity check. I like that. Well, we have to wrap. Daenerys, if you find that case, could you email it to me? I don't know if you're on our Discord server, but if you are, you could also DM me. Marissa, Dan, any final thoughts about finding our power over fear?
Like I said, sanity check. Talk to your coworker. Keep yourself sane. Yeah. Stick together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, all I can think to say is if you are afraid, if you're feeling fear about the situation at your workplace, I think it means it's worth fighting for. You shouldn't feel that way. I think that's a reason to double down and be like, why am I scared? Why are my coworkers scared? We should take a stand for this. Just like use that fear to like fuel you.
Yeah.
Charge ahead, take it down.
Hell yeah. I love that, Marissa.
I'm a very scared person, so I have to. This is how I get motivated. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna tackle this.
Yeah. Me too.
Let's
I deal
go.
with anxiety, so
Yay!
yeah. Every day,
Me
my
too.
body, it's just screaming.
It's a power. If channeled correctly, it's a
It's a
force.
force for good. Yeah, I agree. Um, and I'll just leave you all with this. Don't forget that your rights are protected under the National Labor Relations Act. Your employer is not allowed to threaten you with job loss or otherwise. They're not allowed to interrogate you about your union activity or anybody else who's involved in the effort. They're not allowed to promise you things in exchange for a no vote for your union. And also, on the other side of it, they don't have to follow through with it. They are not contractually obligated to say, oh, yeah, I promised you that, now I have to do it. No. They're like, oh, I promised you that and you voted no. Sick. Love that for you. Actually, now it's not in our budget. Just kidding. And they're also not allowed to spy on you. They're not allowed to surveil you to find out where you're meeting, who you're meeting with, what you're doing off-site. I like to use the acronym of TIPS to remember that. So threats, interrogations, promises, and surveillance. The four big no-nos under the National Labor Relations Act. This one is a computer provided for a working at home employee. Okay, so that's like a work provided a work computer. I'm going to look into that. Thank you, Nair. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Next week, I think Ben Spate's coming. If Ben Spate's out there watching, I think he's not watching this week because his daughter has a play and she's doing an amazing job at that. But next week, I think Ben will be on with me and we'll be talking about something else. I don't know what. We'll figure it out. All right, folks. That's all that's fit to print for this week. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Dan, Marissa, again, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait for y'all to come back. You're always amazing to have on the stream. And everybody else in the chat, if you didn't chime in this week, chime in next week. Would love to see it. And also, all of our YouTube videos are getting uploaded, or all of our Twitch streams are getting uploaded to YouTube, so check us out. You can go to linkup.top/gameworkers, scan the QR code on the right-hand side of the screen, and go to that site and watch our GDC thing. Watch that panel. It was great. Dan was there.
It's so good. I watched it today. It was awesome.
I still haven't seen it. I don't know if I look good, but I'll watch it.
I have to muster the strength.
I did it. It was great. You guys sounded awesome.
It's just when I hear my own voice, I'm like, oh. Anyway, I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.